The television studio lights were blazing hot that October evening in 2002 when Matthew Perry walked onto the set of Late Night with David Letterman, completely unaware he was about to experience the most devastating and transformative 30 seconds of his entire career. What happened next didn't just silence a studio audience of 300 people and millions of viewers watching at home. It broke the heart of a man who had made the world laugh for nearly a decade, revealing the agonizing truth behind Chandler Bing's famous wit and the carefully constructed facade that had been slowly killing him for 5 years. The Friends phenomenon was at its absolute, undeniable peak in the fall of 2002. Season 9 was dominating television ratings not just in America, but across the globe, with episodes being watched by over 25 million viewers weekly. The show had transcended entertainment to become a cultural institution, a weekly ritual that brought families together, a comfort blanket for millions navigating their own complicated lives. Matthew Perry, along with his 5 co-stars, was earning an astronomical $1 million per episode, making him one of the highest-paid actors in television history. To the outside world, to the fans who lined up for hours hoping to catch a glimpse of him, to the entertainment reporters who documented his every public appearance, he had everything any person could possibly want. Fame that reached every corner of the earth, fortune that guaranteed financial security for multiple lifetimes, and the genuine love and adoration of millions of fans who tuned in every Thursday night to watch Chandler Bing deliver perfectly timed sarcastic quips. But inside Studio 4A at NBC's iconic Rockefeller Center, as the autumn chill settled over Manhattan and the familiar pre-show energy buzzed through the building, Matthew Perry was fighting a war that nobody could see, a battle that was slowly destroying him from the inside out, piece by piece, day by day, joke by joke. He had arrived at the NBC building at 5:30 p.m., a full 3 hours before his scheduled appearance, which was highly unusual for someone who had earned a reputation throughout Hollywood for cutting his timing dangerously close. His assistant, Jennifer Walsh, a dedicated young woman who had been working with Matthew for 2 years and had grown genuinely fond of him despite his increasingly erratic behavior, immediately noticed something was profoundly wrong. His hands were shaking as he reviewed the standard talking points that his publicist had prepared, simple, safe topics about the upcoming Friends episodes, his new movie projects, and the general fun behind-the-scenes stories that late-night audiences love to hear. The trembling was subtle, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. But Jennifer had learned to read the signs over the months of watching Matthew struggle with demons he refused to acknowledge publicly. The way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was looking. The way his eyes darted nervously around rooms, as if he was constantly calculating escape routes. The way he excused himself to the bathroom every 20 minutes, staying longer than necessary, returning with slightly more color in his face and a temporary steadiness that never lasted more than an hour. His publicist, Sarah Coleman, a seasoned Hollywood veteran who had spent 15 years managing the careers of A-list celebrities, kept checking her phone nervously every few minutes, fielding calls from network executives and Matthew's management team. Something was definitely wrong, something that went beyond typical pre-interview jitters, but nobody was talking about it directly. There was an unspoken understanding among Matthew's inner circle that certain topics were off-limits, certain questions were never asked, and certain truths were buried beneath layers of professional courtesy and willful ignorance. Matthew Perry had been clean for exactly 47 days. 47 long, excruciating days since his last relapse with prescription painkillers, since the last time he had swallowed the pills that had become his prison, his master, his only escape from the crushing pressure of being funny on command for millions of people every single week. 47 days of white-knuckling through every scene, every interview, every public appearance while his body screamed for the chemical relief that had become as essential as breathing. 47 days of waking up each morning and making the conscious decision to face the world without the pharmaceutical armor that had protected him from his own thoughts, his own fears, his own devastating self-doubt. The addiction had started innocently enough, the way most prescription drug addictions begin, with a legitimate medical need that slowly, insidiously transforms into something darker and more dangerous. A jet ski accident in the summer of 1997 had left Matthew with severe chronic back pain, the kind of persistent, grinding discomfort that made it difficult to stand for long periods, to maintain the physical demands of filming a television show, to sleep peacefully at night. His doctors, well-meaning medical professionals who were simply trying to help their patient manage legitimate pain, prescribed Vicodin, a common opioid painkiller that millions of Americans take safely for short-term pain relief. But the pills didn't just kill the physical pain that radiated from his injured back. They silenced something deeper, something that had been tormenting Matthew Perry long before he ever stepped foot on a television set. The anxiety that kept him awake at night, replaying every joke that fell flat, every scene that didn't work, every moment when he felt like he wasn't funny enough, smart enough, good enough to deserve the success that had been thrust upon him. The self-doubt that whispered constantly in his ear, telling him that he was a fraud, that eventually everyone would realize he wasn't actually talented, that his success was just an elaborate accident that would inevitably be exposed. What began as medical necessity became psychological dependence. One pill became two when the pain seemed worse. Two became four when the anxiety was particularly bad. Four became six when the pressure of an upcoming episode felt unbearable. Soon, Matthew was taking 20, 30, eventually 50 pills a day, hiding his addiction behind Chandler's sarcastic smile and perfectly timed punchlines that never revealed the pharmaceutical fog that clouded his mind during filming. The progression was gradual enough that Matthew could rationalize each increase, each step deeper into dependence. He told himself he needed the pills to function, to be the performer that millions of people expected him to be, to maintain the energy and focus required for the demanding schedule of television production. He convinced himself that he was managing his medication responsibly, that he was still in control, that he could stop whenever he wanted to. His friends, co-stars, knew something was desperately wrong long before Matthew was willing to admit it to himself. Jennifer Aniston, always the most perceptive and caring member of the cast, had discovered pill bottles hidden in his dressing room during the filming of season 6, innocuous-looking prescription containers that seemed to multiply week after week. She had confronted him gently, expressing genuine concern about his well-being, offering support and resources. But Matthew had deflected her worries with jokes and reassurances that everything was fine. Courtney Cox had noticed the dramatic weight loss that came with heavy opiate use, the way Matthew's face had become gaunt and hollow, the way his clothes hung loosely on a frame that seemed to be disappearing week by week. She had tried to approach the subject delicately, suggesting that perhaps he should see a doctor, that maybe he needed some time off to address whatever was affecting his health. But Matthew had brushed off her concerns with the same self-deprecating humor that he used to deflect any serious conversation. Lisa Kudrow, with her psychology background and keen observational skills, had noticed the trembling hands between takes, the way Matthew's eyes seemed unfocused during script readings, the subtle changes in his speech patterns that suggested he was under the influence of something stronger than caffeine. She had consulted with the show's producers about her concerns, but in an industry where the show must go on regardless of personal struggles, there was little appetite for confronting a problem that could jeopardize the production of television's most valuable property. The intervention that finally forced Matthew to confront his addiction didn't come from his friends, his family, his co-workers, or his management team. It came from his own reflection in a bathroom mirror at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in July 2002, when he found himself staring at a stranger, a hollow-eyed, emaciated shell of the person he used to be, clutching an empty pill bottle and realizing that he couldn't remember the last time he had been truly awake, truly present, truly alive. He had checked himself into a private rehabilitation facility in Malibu the next morning, telling his publicist to inform the press that he was suffering from exhaustion, a common Hollywood euphemism for addiction treatment that the entertainment media typically accepted without further investigation. The 30-day program was the most difficult experience of Matthew's life, stripping away not just the chemicals that had numbed his pain, but also the psychological armor that had protected him from facing the deeper issues that had driven him to seek pharmaceutical escape in the first place. The physical withdrawal was brutal, but relatively short-lived. His body, which had become dependent on a steady stream of opiates to function normally, rebelled against their absence with symptoms that included nausea, sweating, muscle aches, and insomnia so severe that he sometimes went 3 or 4 days without meaningful sleep. But the psychological withdrawal was infinitely more challenging, requiring Matthew to develop entirely new coping mechanisms for the anxiety, depression, and self-doubt that had plagued him since childhood. For the first time in years, he had to learn how to be funny without chemical assistance, how to face the pressure of performance without pharmaceutical confidence, how to exist in his own skin without the numbing comfort of opiates. The process was terrifying, humbling, and ultimately liberating as he began to rediscover the person he had been before addiction had consumed his identity. Now, sitting in the late-night green room on October 15, 2002, Matthew stared at his reflection in the mirror and saw something he hadn't seen in years: himself. The weight he had lost during his worst period was slowly returning to his face and frame. The color was coming back to his complexion, replacing the gray pallor that had characterized his appearance during the darkest months. For the first time in years, his eyes looked alive, alert, present in a way that they hadn't been since the early seasons of Friends. He was getting better, he was healing, he was learning to be Matthew Perry without chemical assistance. He had absolutely no idea that in 20 minutes David Letterman would ask him a question that would force him to confront his addiction publicly, in front of millions of people, in a moment that would either destroy what remained of his carefully constructed image, or finally set him free from the prison of secrecy that had been killing him slowly. David Letterman entered the green room at exactly 8:40 p.m., as was his custom before interviewing major guests, particularly those appearing during highly rated weeks when the network executives would be paying especially close attention to the show's performance. Dave was legendary throughout the entertainment industry for doing his homework, for studying his guests extensively, for understanding not just their public personas, but also the more complex, nuanced human beings behind the celebrity facades. "Matthew," Dave said, extending his hand with the genuine warmth that had made him one of the most respected figures in late-night television. "Good to see you, buddy. You look good. Really good. Different. Healthier." There was something in Dave's tone, something that made Matthew's stomach tighten with a familiar anxiety, something that felt like recognition, like understanding, like Dave could see through the carefully maintained facade that Matthew had worked so hard to perfect. "Thanks, Dave. I feel good." Matthew's response was automatic, the kind of deflection he had perfected over years of hiding. But there was something different in his voice, something more genuine than the practiced charm he usually deployed. Dave studied him for a moment longer, his experienced interviewer's instincts picking up on the subtle changes in Matthew's demeanor. "Listen, I want you to know, we're going to have a good time out there tonight. Just be yourself, be honest. The audience appreciates honesty more than anything else." The word honest hung in the air between them like a challenge, like an invitation, like a warning. At 9:15 p.m., Matthew Perry walked onto the late-night stage to thunderous applause from an audience packed with Friends fans who had waited hours for tickets, who screamed with genuine excitement when they saw him emerge from behind the curtain. He waved with the practiced ease of someone who had been performing for audiences his entire adult life, smiled that famous Chandler smile that had become iconic around the world, and settled into the guest chair beside Dave's desk. For the first 8 minutes, everything went exactly as expected. They talked about Friends, about the upcoming Season 9 episodes that fans were desperately anticipating, about the behind-the-scenes chemistry between the cast members that had made the show feel authentic rather than artificially constructed. They discussed Matthew's new movie projects, his upcoming appearances, and the general fun anecdotes that late-night audiences love to hear. Matthew was sharp, witty, vintage Chandler Bing in his responses. His timing was perfect, his delivery was effortless, and the audience laughed at every carefully crafted quip with genuine appreciation. For those 8 minutes, everything felt normal, safe, predictable in the best possible way. Then David Letterman did something that nobody in the studio had expected. He leaned back in his chair, fixed Matthew with that famous gap-toothed stare that had intimidated politicians and world leaders, and said with devastating directness, "Matthew, I want to ask you something, and I hope you don't mind. A lot of people have been asking about you lately, about your health, about some struggles you might be having, about some time you took away from work recently." The studio went quiet. Not completely silent. 300 people don't go completely silent at once, but quiet enough that Matthew could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel the eyes of every person in the audience focusing on him with laser-like intensity. "Dave," Matthew started, his voice steady but his hands unconsciously gripping the arms of his chair. "I know it's personal," Dave continued, his voice gentle but persistent. "I know it's not the kind of thing that people usually talk about on television. But I think there's something to be said for honesty, for letting people know they're not alone in whatever they're fighting." Dave leaned forward slightly and asked the question that would change everything. "Are you fighting addiction, Matthew? Have you been struggling with pills? Is that what the time away from work was really about?" And then it happened. The 30 seconds that broke television history. Matthew Perry opened his mouth to speak. No words came out. He looked down at his hands, then back at Dave, then at the audience of expectant faces, then back at his hands. His mouth opened again. Still nothing. The silence stretched like pulled taffy, like a held breath that couldn't be released. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. In that expanding silence, Matthew Perry was making the biggest decision of his life. He could deflect with a joke, as he had done thousands of times before. He could deny everything, claim that the rumors were false, that his time away had been for exhaustion. He could protect the carefully constructed image that had made him millions. Or he could tell the truth. He could strip away the armor of humor and celebrity that had protected him for so long, and trust that the world would respond with compassion rather than judgment. 20 seconds of silence. The studio audience began to shift uncomfortably, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Dave waited patiently, understanding this was one of those rare moments when television could become something more than entertainment. 25 seconds. Finally, Matthew Perry spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the profound silence of the studio, every word carried with the weight of absolute truth. Yes. One word, one syllable, one admission that simultaneously shattered everything he had worked to protect and began the process of saving his life. Yes, Dave. I am an addict. I have been struggling with prescription painkillers for 5 years now, and His voice cracked with emotion, with relief, with terror at what he was revealing. I'm trying really hard to get better. I'm 47 days clean today, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. The studio erupted, not with applause, though that would come later, but with something deeper and more meaningful. Something that sounded like relief, like recognition, like 300 people simultaneously exhaling breath they didn't know they had been holding. Dave reached across the space between their chairs and touched Matthew's arm, a gesture of support that was captured by every camera in the studio. How are you doing now? Right now, in this moment? Matthew looked directly into the camera, speaking not just to Dave or to the studio audience, but to every person who had ever struggled with addiction. I'm 47 days clean today, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than memorizing lines, harder than timing jokes, harder than performing in front of millions of people every week. But I'm doing it because I want to be here. I want to be present for this life I've been given. I want to be the person my friends and family deserve. What happened next changed television history. Dave didn't cut to commercial, as would have been standard protocol. He didn't crack a joke to lighten the mood. Instead, he continued the conversation, talking to Matthew for another 15 minutes about addiction, recovery, the pressure of fame, and the importance of seeking help. It became one of the most powerful interviews in late-night history, demonstrating that authentic vulnerability could be more compelling than any scripted performance. The interview aired the next night to over 12 million viewers. NBC's phone lines were flooded with calls, not with complaints, but with gratitude. Thousands called to share their own addiction stories, requesting treatment resources. Matthew received over 50,000 letters in the month following the interview, from addicts who said his honesty had inspired them to seek treatment, from family members who said his words had helped them understand their loved ones' struggles, from fans who thanked him for showing that even successful celebrities could struggle and still find recovery. The impact rippled far beyond entertainment, influencing conversations about addiction and mental health throughout American society. It demonstrated that admitting weakness could actually be a demonstration of tremendous strength, that using fame as a platform for important conversations could create meaningful change in countless lives. 5 years later, Matthew Perry would check into rehabilitation for what would be the final time. He would achieve lasting sobriety, dedicating his remaining years to helping others who struggled with addiction. He opened sober living facilities, sponsored other addicts, and became a passionate advocate for treatment resources. He transformed his greatest personal struggle into his most meaningful contribution to the world. Matthew Perry died on October 28, 2023, at the age of 54. The world mourned the loss of Chandler Bing, the character who had brought laughter to millions. But those who knew his real story mourned something greater, a man who had turned his deepest pain into purposeful service, who had demonstrated that recovery was possible even under the most difficult circumstances. His true legacy extends far beyond Friends, beyond Chandler's perfectly timed sarcasm, beyond television history. It lives in every person who found the courage to seek help because of his honesty, every family that was reunited because addiction was treated rather than hidden, every life that was saved because someone chose truth over shame. That legacy began with 30 seconds of silence on a Tuesday night in October 2002, when Matthew Perry chose vulnerability over protection, honesty over image management, hope over fear. It was the moment when a beloved entertainer became something more important than a star. He became an example of human courage, a demonstration that healing is possible, and a reminder that our greatest struggles can become our most meaningful contributions to the world.